but that's what we got now. So
yeah, I know.
Like we said at the top of this, I don't think we're going to see much more of Chickenfoot.
Yeah.
But their debut album was pretty solid. Their second album, when we get to talk around that someday, I don't think that's any worse than the first album. And you might be able to convince me in some ways, even though it doesn't rock as hard as the first album.
Right.
I think the songs are better than the first album, and I might be enticed to say it's actually overall better than the first album.
If you take out drinking or buy you a cheeseburger, it's always I could be convinced.
I might do that hungry and sober.
But
that's another podcast for another day.
That's right. Well, we will end this right here with Winner Chickenfoot Dinner. Do me a favor, go out and get that deluxe version of the first Chickenfoot album. I promise you, a lot of people listening to this podcast have overlooked that album. This is a very, very good album, and it's really, really rocking. It's got some killer guitar on it. What a fantastic record. Even though there are some spots where it's lyrically thin, it actually doesn't matter. I'm giving Sammy a free pass here. Sam, grab it and run with it. Listen to me. It is really fantastic. The sound quality on this and the chemistry is there. This was an overlooked album. The album did fine. It went gold. Oh, more than gold, actually. But this album doesn't get its due as much as it should. This is a really crispy, crunchy album that is great to throw on. It is 10 years old, and I suggest you give it another spin. We're going to continue this Chickenfoot train. We have a gentleman who is a listener, a dedicated listener to this podcast by the name of Darin Bristow. And he was the art director and creator of one of the Chickenfoot videos. It's called Get It Up, which is Dave's theme song. So he did a video for that. And we do an interview with him about his whole process. The interesting story here is Darin was simply a fan who emailed the band and offered his services and ended up putting together an entire Chickenfoot video. It's a really interesting story. He's a very cool guy. And that's all coming up next. Take a listen.
What I'm doing on stage is me. That's the only thing I can do. Seriously. I put everything I got into what I do on record or live, and I'm glad people like it.
Hey folks, I'd like to introduce you to the Classic Rock Album by Album podcast. Welcome to the Classic Rock Album by Album podcast, where no stone is left unturned in the show's epic quest to review and dissect every single rock album ever made. Join self-proclaimed rock authorities Chris Carson and Lee Bowie on their epic journey to uncover the true classics. You can find the Classic Rock Album by Album podcast wherever podcasts can be found, including Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Our website address is classicrockalbumbyalbum.libsyn.com. That's LIBSYN.com. And we can be reached on Facebook at fb.me/Classic Rock Album by Album. See you soon from the Classic Rock Album by Album podcast.
This is Christian Gehring. I play David Lee Roth in The Dirt, and you're listening to Dave and Dave Unchained.
I haven't been on a big worldwide kind of tour since the last Chickenfoot record, and even then it was like 50 shows. It's hard for me to go out for that long of a time anymore. I've just been doing it my whole life, and I start losing interest, and when I lose interest, I don't want to do it. You know, it's like I want to feel like when I go on stage, I want to do this. Oh boy, I can't wait to get out there on that stage. And so I usually limit it to the amount of time where I keep feeling like that, and this is working. You know, it's just physically very difficult as you get older to do a great show, which I want to do, you know, and I'm physical on stage, and I sing very hard and loud and crazy and play extremely hard. And so when I'm done with that, the next morning I go, ooh, man, I'm like, wow, ouch, ouch, you know, hope I can sing good. So my voice has held up all these years, and I'm proud of that.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have a great guest this evening. in theming with our Chickenfoot episode, we have Darin Bristow from Pipeline Studios on the line here with Dave and I. Darin, thank you so much for coming on.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
Awesome. Now, why is Darin on the podcast? Well, Darin listens to the podcast, so he's one of our listeners. So we're happy to have him aboard. But also, Darin was the director, or what would you call it, creative director or director of the Chickenfoot video, Get It Up?
Correct. I guess I directed, I'll explain as we get into it, basically how I made it, but I kind of did a lot of myself. I'll explain it later. But
okay. So this is great. So Dave, because Dave and I are talking about the Chickenfoot album this month, Darin offered to come on. He did this great video for Chickenfoot called Get It Up, which was themed after Dave's goal every day, to get it up.
Couldn't resist. He couldn't resist. Not even 5 minutes into the interview.
Well, look, I'm only being honest, and, as you are slowly approaching 50, we all know that this is true.
You know, when I was going over the song list of this album, I said to myself, I wonder how long it's going to take him to throw in a joke. So thank you for not disappointing me.
Well,
That's
of course. You knew it was coming, so you know what? You have to say you were prepared. So, what can I say? You were warned.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate that.
That's right. So Darin, tell us about this video. Now, Darin's video is not your average video. It is an animated video, and it's very, very cool, and he's going to tell us about it. How did this whole concept and video come about?
Well, I'm a massive fan of Van Halen, and, I was a big fan of Chickenfoot as well. At the time when the record came out, I had been working in a brand new software that does 2D animation better than any other animation software on the market. So I thought, how can I leverage this to work with my, one of my favorite artists and favorite bands? So believe it or not, I just sent an email to redrocker.com saying, who I am and the shows that I've produced, shows like Backyardigans, Bubble Guppies. It's mostly Nickelodeon and Disney, right?
Right.
And I said, here's who I am, and although I'm a fan, I'm also a producer and creative director at a legitimate studio. And if you guys have ever considered doing an animated video, I should be the person that should do it for you.
Wow.
And I hit enter, and I got a response.
How long did you get a response? How long did it take?
It was pretty much, I think it was a couple hours later, pretty much immediately, because, It was a short, sweet email.
Yeah.
And, I had a couple links in the email to projects that, I had worked on. So it's legitimate, and they're projects that are seen around the world. So they weren't, I guess I was just trying to tell them I wasn't just, a guy in his basement with a laptop. Like I'm a legitimate producer.
Right.
And I could execute something at a great level, right?
Sure. And so tell me, how did the whole, concept come about? Did they pick the song? Did you pick the song? How did it all come together?
So it was funny because I kind of know how this works, and I thought, because I loved all the songs, but I really loved Down the Drain.
Okay.
And when I came up with the idea, I thought, I'm going to come up with an idea that is, good enough that could be used for any song and not just tie it to any specific song, because if they do want to do it and I come up with an idea that's too specific and they don't want to do that song, I'm pretty much dead in the water.
Right.
So that approach kind of worked. Because they asked me, why don't you pick the song? And I said, I love Down the Drain. And they said, okay, that's great. Let us think about that and get back to you.
Uh-huh.
And the concept I had could kind of translate to any of the songs, really, right?
Right.
Then they said, when can you finish it by? I said, when do you need it by?
Right.
They said, this was like November, right? It's almost 10 years ago to the month.
Wow.
And they said, we need it by the beginning of the year because it's E1, which I think at the time they were on E1
right.
record label. And they said, E1 has decided that Get It Up will be the final single. So can you do it to Get It Up? And I was somewhat relieved, even though I love Down the Drain.
Right.
Because Down the Drain is like 5 minutes long.
Right.
Yeah. It's one of the longest songs on the album, right?
And that means there'd be a lot of work to do, right?
Right.
So I said, that's great. Get Up is great. I like that song. And they said, we need it even before the end of the year so we can get it out, because they have so many social media things and things they have to do to kind of prep for the release.
Sure.
That we need it by the end of December.
Right.
So animation is a tedious, long process.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure.
So you've got a month to get this thing done.
Well, usually animation can take for an episode, it can take, to when you finally watch it, it can be like 6 months.
Absolutely. Animation takes, absolutely.
Wow. And you have 1 month to do this.
I had less than 1 month. But the good news is I was anticipating, I kind of went in knowing how much time I had. So I storyboarded the whole idea myself, because that's where basically a lot of the time can get sucked away, where you're trying to, whoever you're working with, you're going back and forth on what the actual concept is. And that time could have evaporated just getting to an idea. So I was lucky to have a storyboard that I had made already. So I pretty much just said, I have an idea and I can show it to you. And I kind of timed it when they were going to be, I live near Toronto, and they were going to be in Toronto at the end of, I think it was around the time they started talking about it. And sure enough, that's when we met, and I had the idea, and I basically just played the storyboard, kind of like an animatic is what we call a storyboard that's been kind of put to time and had voices and sound effects in it. It's kind of like a rough copy of the show.
Right.
So I had that, and they happened to like it. So we cut off a huge portion of time because I had a concept that was ready to go.
Yeah, well,
that was a big part of it.
Yeah.
Now, were you always dealing with the entire band, or was it certain band members in particular, or was it management? Who were you dealing with?
Well, the person that ended up responding to me was a man named Carter. And I guess when you're such a big name or a big person in your industry, and when you go by just one name, you're something big, right?
Right. Now, he was their manager, right?
He was there. So John Carter, you guys probably know, that was Sammy's original. He signed Sammy to Capitol Records in the early 70s, right?
Right.
And he was the guy responsible for, he was also in a band in the 60s called the Strawberry Alarm Clock or something.
Wow.
Oh, he was in that band? Wow, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, I think this song, something in Peppermints and whatever that big song is that band had, John Carter wrote that song.
Okay.
So he was kind of a recording artist that had moved into, I guess, kind of an A&R guy and signed Sammy. And they became really good friends. And then in the 80s, they kind of drifted apart. And Carter was the guy who was responsible for basically putting Tina Turner's career back on the rails.
Wow.
Which I found out kind of in my conversations for him as we produced this video together. I didn't realize just how big this guy was. He was a super cool guy, super down to earth. Every time I met him, he was always in shorts and sandals. Had no clue, he had done in his career, right? So He's the one that ultimately answered my email and said, well, look, we'll be in Toronto. Meet us at the Five Seasons Hotel after the show.
Right.
And show us what you got. So I had to split out of the show, unfortunately, 2 songs before the end, because I had to get way up to the hotel.
Right.
And this is around midnight, right? So here I'm at midnight sitting in this hotel. It's all dark and there's nobody around. And I'm sitting with my laptop with my wife going, this may not even happen, right?
Jeez.
So here we are sitting there at midnight, and sure enough, a stretched Hummer shows up, and out pops the entire band.
Wow.
Nice.
And my wife's a few years younger than me, so she kind of is in the tail end. She likes a little bit. She knows, obviously, who Van Halen is. She doesn't know as much about it at this point as I do, obviously.
Sure.
She's kind of she's a kind of a grunge person, but we'll hold that against her.
Okay.
Anyway, she's sitting beside me, and as I'm sitting there stunned because it's actually happening, and these guys are pouring out, and they're they just came off a great concert, so they're on a huge high.
Right.
Chad Smith is running around. He jumped up on the counter, and he's like drumming on people who are coming out the elevator. He's like air drumming everywhere like a madman, right?
Wow.
Michael Anthony strolls in, and he's always Michael Anthony, super cool, right, down to earth. Satriani is very quiet, too. He comes walking in, and then Sandy comes walking in, right? And like I said, this is around midnight, so no one's really in the hotel to really bother them.
Right.
And then his manager, Carter, comes in, and they all come over and kind of stand behind us. And, of course, my wife, not being a starstruck, because she doesn't exactly know who he is exactly yet, she starts talking to the rest of the band, and I sit with Carter. And I pitched my idea to Carter, and I have to be honest, I was like shaking, because here's one of my heroes standing right behind me, and I can't say anything because I'm talking to the manager, right?
Sure.
Right.
It's kind of a funny situation. But basically, on a handshake, he liked my idea, and the band was kind of milling around behind, wondering what was kind of going on. I think Sammy had a clue, an idea what was going on, but he let Carter kind of handle it, and we had a quick conversation, and Carter's like, "Okay, let's do this," and we shook hands. And off we went. It was a pretty cool old school, which is kind of a great way to describe Carter, way of handling things, which doesn't happen often in this, right? Usually there's like a lot of paperwork and lawyers and stuff. But it was a handshake, and off we went, right?
Wow.
It was pretty cool.
Did you talk money and